We're diving into one of the most intense moments in the entire book of Revelation, the seventh and final plague from chapter 16. It sounds like the end of the world, right? But what if it wasn't about the end of the world, but the end of an era? The interpretation we're looking at today ties it all to one single explosive historical event. Let's get into it.
So it all kicks off with this. The seventh angel pours out his bowl, and then a booming voice, right from the throne of God, declares, "It is done." I mean, talk about finality. These three little words aren't just signaling the end of a plague, they're slamming the door on an entire age.
So, what exactly is done? Well, according to this source material, that powerful statement means all the prophesied judgments for that specific time against the nation of Israel are now complete. An age has come to a very definitive and, as we'll see, a very violent close.
And that declaration isn't followed by, a quiet moment. Nope, it's followed by absolute chaos. First up is this cataclysmic event described as a great earthquake. But this wasn't just the ground shaking, this was a political earthquake that would bring an empire to its knees. I mean, listen to the language here. It's an earthquake like nothing the world had ever seen before. It's so intense, so over the top. You just get this sense of a total foundational upheaval. Everything is coming apart.
And that, of course, leads you to wonder, are we talking about the ground literally ripping open? Or is this incredibly powerful imagery pointing to something else entirely?
And this is where the interpretation gets really interesting. The source material argues, no, this isn't literal, it's symbolic. The earthquake represents this massive shaking of the political order. It's about the crises and the collapse that were happening at the same time in both the Jewish nation and the mighty Roman Empire during the first century. And the epicenter of this symbolic quake, the place where all this political shaking was most violent, was the city of Jerusalem. The prophecy even describes it as a city tearing itself apart.
The text gets even more specific. It says the great city was divided into three parts, and you have to notice the name it's given here, Great Babylon. That name is just loaded with history and prophetic weight, and now it's coming under God's final judgment.
So just to be super clear, this interpretation identifies both the great city and Babylon as symbolic names for Jerusalem. Jerusalem was the absolute heart of the conflict during that Roman-Jewish war that came to a head in 70 AD.
Okay, now this is fascinating. What does it mean that the city was divided into three parts? Well, this interpretation offers two historical ways to look at it. The first one looks at what happened to the people. About a third were killed in the fighting, a third died from starvation and disease, and that final third was sold off into slavery. The second interpretation points to the three rival zealot factions that were literally at war with each other inside the city walls, even as the Romans were trying to get in from the outside.
And here's the critical point. The historian Philip Carrington points out that this internal division, this infighting, was so bad that it actually made the city fall to the Romans faster. They were so busy fighting each other, they basically handed the city over. It's a direct, tragic fulfillment of that prophecy of a city divided against itself.
But the political earthquake and the city's internal collapse were only part of the judgment. The final plague also describes this terrifying storm coming out of the sky, the plague of great hail. So the prophecy talks about a great hail falling from heaven. And once again, we have to ask ourselves, are we looking at a literal weather event, or is this pointing to a very specific and very real weapon of war? The description is just incredible. Massive hailstones, each weighing about the weight of a talent, are raining down on people. Which of course brings up the question, what in the world is a talent?
A talent was an ancient unit of wheat, and let me tell you, it was heavy. We're talking about stones that weighed somewhere between 75 and 100 pounds, each. Can you even imagine the destructive force of something like that falling from the sky?
And here it is. Here's the direct historical connection that just makes you go, wow. This interpretation argues that the symbolic hail was a direct prophecy of the Roman army's siege engines. The historian Josephus actually wrote about this. He recorded that General Titus's catapults were launching massive white stones, each weighing about a talent, over the walls of Jerusalem, crushing everything and everyone below. The prophecy was fulfilled in terrifying literal detail.
So you've got a political earthquake, you've got this devastating hail of stones. It is a picture of total and complete annihilation. But what was the point of all this destruction? What was the ultimate purpose? Well, the passage uses this ultimate imagery of deconstruction. I mean, islands and mountains, those are the very symbols of stability, of permanence. To say that they fled away or were not found is a poetic way of saying that the entire world as they knew it was just gone.
You have to put yourself in their shoes. For the people of that time, the Jewish temple, the political structures, the nation itself, these things felt permanent, unmovable. But in this final judgment, their whole world order was being shaken to its very foundations and completely removed. And this is where a passage from the book of Hebrews just clicks everything into place. It gives us the theological key. The whole point of shaking and removing the old, temporary stuff was to make way for the thing that can't be shaken, a new spiritual kingdom that can never be moved or destroyed.
So the biggest takeaway from this interpretation is really powerful. The apocalyptic events of Revelation 16 weren't describing the end of the entire world. They were describing the violent, cataclysmic end of the Old Covenant era, the age defined by the temple and its laws. It was about clearing the ground for a new spiritual kingdom that could never be destroyed.
And this really leaves us with a final, big question to think about. When we read prophecy not just as some mysterious vision of the distant future, but as a text deeply connected to its own time, how does that change the way we understand its message for us today? It's a pretty powerful shift in perspective to consider.